critical driver of construction productivity is tracking the materials shipped as part of a capital project. Unique ID technologies such as barcoding, RFID, and Bluetooth Low Energy are increasingly used to improve materials tracking and digitize capital project materials management work processes. Research Team 384 provides a robust 5-step strategy that the industry can use to standardize upstream tagging of smart materials and seamlessly integrate materials tracking and field information. Here to present the team's findings are Steve Hunsaker, David Grau, and Brian Kendig.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the second half of day one. My name is Brian Kendig, and I'm with Dow Chemical Company. I've been very blessed to be part of RT 384. And my colleagues presenting, you heard, we'll have Dr. David Grau and Stephen Hunsaker. I'd like to say, thank you to everybody that's helped us with this. We're going to take you through our RT 384, which is currently in the knowledge base. We're very excited about what we have to present to you today. You can see that our team is very diverse. We were compiled by teams representing owner-operators, EPCs, technology manufacturers, and academia. David, myself, and Steve, we wish to recognize the many people that were on our team, especially a shout out to Thomas Hatley. A lot of what we're presenting today, the original idea originated from Thomas. In addition to me being on this team, I was the chair of the innovation subcommittee, and through Thomas, we delivered this to CII technology team, and this became a project, and we've been working it for the past 2 years. So we're really excited today to present this to you, and you'll hear throughout all the neat things that are included in RT 384. Before I move to the next slide, I want to ask you, have you ever heard some of the comments that you're about to hear, or maybe you've made these comments yourself?
When you have multiple people touching the material and contractors involved, material tends to walk away magically.
The biggest barrier to materials tracking and tracing is change management. There's no materials data consistency at the moment.
So these can be typical, going to back up, these can be typical comments in a large capital project where you've got some materials management challenges. You'll see some of these characters come out later. We have a little Hanna-Barbera cartoon for you towards the end where we're going to use some of that to try to stimulate your interest in another way. But we have your construction manager talking about materials walking away. In the middle, a project manager dealing with trying to move from old ways of doing things to new things and dealing with change management. And at the bottom, a technology manager trying to deal with disparate data systems, trying to connect the data systems together. Before we get into the details, we want to go over a few key definitions. So materials management is a very broad concept. I'll let you read that for yourself, but I'll mention a couple of the key words here, dealing with the quality and quantity of materials and equipment being specified in a timely manner and obtained at a reasonable cost and available when needed. So that's an umbrella definition for materials management. A subset of materials management is upstream materials tracking and information tracing. And this really is the heart of RT 384. Sharing the vendor and supplier's status of materials, production and delivery, and other information with a project team for the reliable planning and installation of components, materials, and equipment. So RT 384 will be addressing upstream materials tracking and information tracing. And as you can see, upstream materials tracking and information tracing is a subset of materials management. So, why is it so important? Why is it a key item for us, anyone involved in a capital project? Well, first of all, we have a very complex supply chain or EPC capital construction projects. And I'll reflect on my experience 30 years ago when I began my career, not far from here, 3.5 hours south in a little town called Mount Vernon, Ohio. I worked for a gas turbine compressor manufacturer. Back then, we had our own foundry. We would pour compressor casings. We had our own yard where we would bring in rough stock. We had a machining center where we would do CNC and conventional machining of heavy metal components. We had our own controls organization that did programmable logic controlling, made printed circuit boards. We did our own assembly, our own testing. I could take somebody through the factory and show them all of this in one location. That was in the early 90s. The decades that came after, that all started to go away from American manufacturing. I think Mr. Basu said in the earlier presentation that manufacturing is coming back. In the EPC environment, that hasn't yet made the dent. And we have a very complex global supply chain. You know, what happened was the vertical integration that used to exist, it stopped existing. And we started sourcing materials from international global locations. So when you're buying a complex package, as a buyer, as a project manager, as a materials manager, you're having to manage the flow of all those one package, but maybe coming from 15 different locations, hundreds of boxes, making sure they're arriving at the yard and putting them all together and tracking them. So it's a very complex supply chain. And that's why it's very important for us to further provide guidelines for materials tracking and tracing. And to give you some idea of the influence that materials can have on project performance, 40 to 50% of the total installed cost of a project can be impacted by the materials. And I had mentioned earlier the suppliers. We have a fragmented supply chain. But if we do it right, we can impact 6% improved craft labor productivity, and we can impact 16% schedule reduction possibly. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. David Grau, that's going to explain to you some of our research methods.
All right, good afternoon. So, as an academic of the team, I'm going to explain what we did and how we did it. So let's just start going back in time, a little bit of history here. 2008, research team 240 introduced the first technology approach to track materials on project sites. Through research, it was proved that the technology approach reduced the time of material searches on project sites by a ratio of 8:1 and improved craft labor productivity by more than 4%. The technology was feasible, the technology was successful, so it got commercialized and became mainstream for industrial projects. Now let's move forward in time, 2019. So 3 years ago, CII experts identified supply chain materials management or upstream materials management as a function promising to improve project performance by integrating materials data and information from vendors and suppliers into the construction planning or the construction schedule. Indeed, think about it. Knowledge and awareness of key information such as current fabrication status, warnings on potential fabrication issues, or accurate delivery dates are going to improve the reliability of the planning, the efficiency of construction operations, and eventually have a positive impact on cost and schedule performances. However, there is always a however, right? However, we know that supply chain materials management had not been documented. So that was the mission of our team. During the research, though, we realized that the inclusion of an on-site aspect would improve the quality of the final products of the team. So even though upstream tracking and tracing has remained the priority of the team, the scope of work also included an on-site tracking and tracing component. Through our research, we engage with many subject matter experts. These are some of the things that we heard from the subject matter experts as to why you want to download, read, and share the report of this team. Key stakeholders often are reluctant to adopt new material technologies with the excuse of a questionable return on investment. However, subject matter experts express that a positive return on investment and actually a positive impact on project performance are out of question. As an example, one of the surprises of this team came from owners and contractors with a longer record of upstream tracking and tracing work. What did they tell to us? Well, they shared that the documentation of the materials information through vendors and suppliers actually mitigates litigation among key stakeholders. So these owners and contractors that have been practicing upstream tracking and tracing has actually adopted that upstream tracking and tracing through the portfolio of projects. That is one example of impact on project performance. My colleague Brian, later on in this presentation, will show another example of how tracking and tracing actually has a positive impact on projects. So what we did? A comprehensive literature review led to the design of an online survey. The analysis of the 50 survey responses elicited an understanding of the current state of digital material readiness in the industry, as well as barriers and opportunities. In addition, the analysis of 10 case studies on projects with a strong materials function led to the development of a tracking and tracing model of practices. Complementing the model, we also developed a tool that assesses the maturity of implementation of tracking and tracing at project level, and weighted the tool through a dedicated workshop with the participation of 21 subject matter experts. Overall, through our research, we have engaged with 90 subject matter experts that were affiliated with 37 owner, contractor, supplier, and technology service provider organizations. So this slide contains some of the products that you can find in our report: a tracking and tracing model of practices and a step-by-step implementation guidance, a tool that assesses the maturity of the implementation of the practices at project level, case studies on projects with a strong materials function, and finally, a number of implementation resources and tips that we collected from the subject matter experts through our research journey. Overall, our report is published. It is available at the CII knowledge base on the CII website. So what you want to do next is to download the report, read it, and share it with the supply chain and material experts within your organization. Next, Steve will introduce the tracking and tracing model. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to briefly review the model that David was talking about that was developed by the research team. It's pretty comprehensive, so I can't cover a lot of details here in our short amount of time, but the details are all in the RT 384 guideline publication. So the materials model of tracking and tracing evolved from interviews with projects that had robust both offsite, upstream, and onsite material tagging and tracking. And common themes emerged as we went through the interviews that led to the development of 43 different strategies. 43, wow, that's a lot. Dave was pretty busy on that, and we were pretty comprehensive. These strategies were grouped into the sequence of these 4 implementation stages you see here. First, the consultation stage. This is where it provides for support of an informed decision of whether you're going to adopt materials tracking technology, and if you are, by what approach. Second, the request for proposal phase. Here the focus is really on gathering of procurement information that drives the adoption of materials tracking technologies in suppliers' organizations. Third, the upstream tracking and tracing stage. This is really, you aim at effectively implementing your material technologies at the vendors and suppliers. So this includes how you're going to onboard them, and then also how you're going to do on the reporting of material status during fabrication. And finally, on-site tracking and tracing. Here's the ultimate objective, is to feed construction planning and the operation organization with real-time material status information. So as I said, there were 4 stages. These are divided into 10 functions that you see here, and within those functions, you have the 43 strategies for implementation. I'm not going to cover all the specific 43 strategies here, but again, if you want all the juicy details, go to the publication. In addition to the publication, or in it also, you'll find many resources that the SMEs graciously provided as we engaged them for implementation. On the next slide, I am going to go through a couple of small examples of 3 of the strategies and the resources. So as part of the consultation stage where you're trying to come to a go, no-go decision on whether to adopt material tracking and tracing, the development of a digital materials hierarchy here really is a core aspect. So the materials hierarchy, it defines which materials you're going to digitally trace or track and what technology, be a barcode or RFID or Bluetooth or something else. What it does is it implicitly sorts the materials by importance to the project. By that I mean, here's where you make your decision about where am I going to apply my more expensive technologies for the materials that's more critical for the project. Now the tracking strategy underneath here must identify by material type where you're going to apply the tag, at the supplier or the fab yard, or a receipt at the project site or the laydown yard. There, again, there's examples of this hierarchy in the publication. Now, as you go deeper into the paper and read a little bit over there, you also learn that implementation of a digital materials technology is very unlikely if it's not contractually obligated. So early engagement with prospective suppliers and vendors is a key element to implement, and it accumulates with the inclusion of the results in the purchase order. And here's one example, and I think we have more in the publication of actual contract language that's been used. So another key strategy that we heard from the SMEs as we talked to them was when you track complex components. And I'm talking about large pump packages, maybe packaged equipment of that one, or construction modules. And if you're going to digitally track these, you also need to digitally track the subcomponents that are there, which means you need to establish a logistic relationship between the tracking devices so you can effectively and efficiently track these subcomponents. And that is, if you're on a construction module, I'm sure you know we're talking thousands of items. This is typically, in the industry, it's called a parent-child relationship. And here we just have an example of 2 different approaches to how you might create that logistic relationship, either one-on-one or one-on-bunch on complex components. So another common theme that we heard during our research with the SMEs is there really was no guidance in industry on how to measure their performance on digital materials tracking. So to address that, we developed this maturity assessment tool. So in order to evaluate the readiness of a project, materials tracking on a project, the tool was designed, it was weighted, and I'll cover that a little bit later, and then we implemented it in a simple Microsoft Excel format. The assessment tool is technology agnostic, meaning it's not constrained to a single specific supplier or material tracking or information tracing technology. It's also simple. Any owner, contractor, or supplier can use the tool regardless of the degree of experience in material tracing technology. So how does the tool work? The tool works by enabling the assessment of the tracking functions by individually evaluating each of the 43 strategies in the model I discussed. Each is assessed on a level of 1 to 4 of increasing maturity of definition and implementation. So here's an example of one of the ones. This is for the strategy of key stakeholder engagement. You can see the varying degrees of potential maturity assessments. And this one's looking at how collaborative you are in actively engaging key stakeholders early in the process. So you would evaluate this either individually as a group, and you kind of land on, here's where I think we are, and that would be your assessment for that one strategy. So you go through, it takes about a half hour to go through the entire assessment. As I said, you can either do it individually or you could do it as a team. And what the users do is they go through each strategy, looking at the definitions that were there, and rate it here. And we also have an NA out there in case it just doesn't apply to your project. So as an output, the tool will generate for you charts and a report, but also recommended actions to improve your tracking and tracing function. During the research, it also became clear that certain strategies were more important out of the 43 that were there. So it was therefore needed to weight the factors to figure out how we would do that. As David alluded to earlier, we held a workshop with 21 industry SMEs to work through. They had substantial experience in construction and materials technology. And from there, we were able to gather the data, establish the weightings, it was normalized, and then it was incorporated into the tool. As you can see in our example here, when we ran through, we need a little more work in our key stakeholder engagement. So the weights were calculated for each of the strategies, put it in the tool, and then the tool is used to determine the maturity of 10 functions in the 4 stages of the model. It's just an example here. And finally, there are 2 options on how to use a tool when you're assessing it. You can assess your entire tool across all 4 stages and look at that, or you also can just do 1 stage at a time. An owner, for example, may want to review the consultation stage early on before a go, no-go decision, and really before they have the ability to even see the other stages that are there. A contractor, on the other hand, may want to look at the upstream and the on-site tracking and tracing separately, as these may involve different parties. I'll turn over to my partner to talk about ROI.
You all still with us? Okay, so let's just do a quick recap. We started out explaining that RT through 84 deliverable is in the knowledge base. We don't believe there's anything quite like it. So material tagging and tracking, we provided a definition of tracing and tagging technology. We said that was a subset of materials management. We tried to explain why it's important. Hundreds of suppliers, materials coming from all over, the impact that it can have on a project, the positive impact in terms of the productivity. David took us through our methodology at a very high level. And then you just heard Steve talk about kind of a deep dive into the maturity assessment tool. But he also provided some examples of some practical guidelines that we have in there. You saw some contract terms for suppliers. You saw a matrix that shows which types of tagging technologies that you apply to different types of materials. You saw some tagging ideas for parent-child relationships. So we hope this is giving you some thirst for what is in there. It's a combination of very practical guidelines and some research-based data. So now we're going to go into the return on investment. Okay, so RT 384 research reveals that many capital construction projects require a return on investment evaluation before implementing the technology. This was very interesting. Each one of us on the team that is in an owner-operator or even an EPC company, we all recognize this. We think maybe it says something about the state of our industry or maybe the experience that we've all had in implementing the technology. It's definitely not the same value proposition as it would be for a grocery store. We're all very familiar with the checkouts at the grocery store where we're scanning everything. Well, this is not the same value proposition. We're going to take you into some of the details of the ROI, return on investment. So the paper does document at least three examples of positive return on investment. And one, we have a major oil refinery project with estimated savings of $5 million by implementing digital materials management. Another one is a chemical project received and issued materials 30% faster with digital material system. And then a third one, a nuclear project reported 0 lost materials with on-site tracking. What are the value drivers for the return on investment? Well, we fit them into 4 categories. One is called transactional, another is search time, labor productivity is the third, and construction operations. So transactional, think about automated materials transactions, avoiding manual and time-consuming typing of material codes and data when you're in the field and the errors associated with them. So with a modern materials tracking database, you have a handheld device, you're in the field, imagine you're being a receiver in the field, and you're scanning a code or an RFID tag, and through that scan you have data populating automatically into your tool about the purchase order and what's in there, so that you're minimizing the typing. So that's transactional value driver. A second, on-site materials, search time. If you're using GPS coordinates or you've got a yard with a laydown, you've got grids, and that grid information is included in the database. research has found you can reduce your search time in the proportion of 8 to 1. So that's very important to being when you're in the field. And third, labor productivity. So we all know how important advanced work packaging is, right? There's lots of efforts going on there to improve how we're applying advanced work packaging. So if we can provide the materials to our construction managers at the right time, right location, right quantities, using this, it helps with the labor productivity. And then finally, the ability of a project team to feed construction planning and execution with updates on material status, both at vendors and on-site, has a ripple effect on construction operations and project cost and schedule performance. So those are our value drivers. The survey, David alluded to a survey. So we did a survey, and we found that across the board, for owners, project management teams, and vendors, the perception of an unclear return on investment is a barrier for everyone, for owners, contractors, and vendors alike. This negative perception contrasts with the experience of the subject matter experts who, during the interview process, emphasized the benefits of tracking and tracing. And when properly planned and implemented, it often provides an ROI multiple times the investment cost. So again, we have challenges when we're implementing it on projects, but the subject matter experts believe that it provides an ROI that's quite high. So, why is our industry so confused about the return on investment? We've prepared a story to tell you, and so it's going to be a little bit of a Hanna-Barbera cartoon that we're going to show here. It's an animation. Before we get into that, there's some clues I want to talk about. Think about the timing of engagement, supplier compliance, data system connectivity, championing of technology in the field, to name a few. Let's see if you can spot other reasons and resolutions. So we'll go ahead and roll the video.
The return on investment story. A project kickoff meeting is occurring. The following people can be seen conversing around a table. Scene 1, project provision for material tagging and tracking. The project manager raises the point in question.
Well, is there anything else we should consider before finalizing the budget?
The project technology manager responds.
There's a new CII study, Research Team 384, Material Tagging and Tracking Guidelines. I think we should consider implementing a material tagging and tracking program and embedding key milestones inside our project schedule.
In reply, the project manager says,
We've already allocated 40% of the project budget to construction. Can the cost of a tagging and tracking program come from that budget? Let's meet again in 2 weeks, and you can present the return on investment of your proposal. Be sure to include the cost items that we can eliminate by including a tagging and tracking program.
The construction manager is concerned. Scene 2, the argument and disagreement. The construction manager and the project technology manager are meeting alone. The construction manager argues,
The investment cost of such a program doesn't pay for itself. And besides, I'd rather allocate my budget for field personnel rather than technology.
Construction manager cites his experience from many years ago at a different company when a specific project called for every type of material to be tagged.
Yeah, tagging technology salesperson sold the project bill of goods, claiming sensational, exaggerated ROI. During execution, many suppliers just would not comply. Tags often fell off the material. The database where the scanned data was stored was not connected to the company's engineering and financial systems, requiring multiple points of data re-entry and data reformatting. On top of that, the project integrated the tagging and tracking work processes and training very late in the project schedule. Many materials had already been received on site before the material receivers had been trained on how to use the technology.
Project technology manager begs to differ. He convinces the construction manager to sit down, and the two of them peruse the CII knowledge base, looking through RT 384 and other sources. The project technology manager states,
Research Team 384 contains experience-tested advice on evaluating institutional maturity for material tagging, tips for integrating data systems, tips for integrating a tagging program into the project schedule, tips for deciding which material to tag, tagging technologies to use, how to communicate requirements to suppliers, when to train suppliers and internal stakeholders, and how to apply tags.
The construction manager is convinced that RT 384 can help successfully guide a tagging program, and he finally agrees to help evaluate the ROI of such a program. They agree to a series of meetings over the next 4 to 5 days.
Okay, I agree. This does look helpful. Let's give it a shot. I'll agree to help and try and calculate an ROI for our project.
Scene 3, the ROI Conundrum. The project technology manager figures a good starting place for calculating ROI is to investigate the company's body of experience with material tagging and tracking over previous years. He convenes a meeting with the construction manager, the construction director, and key personnel involved with construction materials management. The project technology manager asks,
what empirical data do we have on file for each of our previous material tagging and tracking programs? Do we have an experience list that defines the project, types of materials tagged, tag counts, technologies used, cost, value received, etc.?
Much to his chagrin, the project technology manager learns that very little formal record keeping of the desired information has been centrally kept and referenced over the years. The construction director sums up the situation.
Unfortunately, very little central record keeping and institutional learning has occurred in this space over the years. Our learning is limited to what is retained within the memories of the project team members and then passed on in ad hoc fashion. We must do a better job of record keeping and institutional learning relative to our tagging and tracking applications.
The construction manager, who only recently joined the company, confirms.
Yeah, the same situation existed at my former company. I think the entire industry just lacks institutional learning relating to the application of materials tagging and tracking. I mean, it's not like an engineering practice where everything is technically validated, well documented, and historical records are kept. I mean, when's the last time you saw a university textbook that covered the economics and practical application of material tagging?
There is now an understanding that empirical data are scarce. It is also believed that much of the empirical data offered by technology vendors tends to lack a probability correlation to the specifics of a given project. With these 2 points understood, the project technology manager proposes.
Let's use Research Team 384 as a general guide for constructing a return on investment. We'll of course have to apply discretion and clever calculation based on the guidance provided.
The team agrees. Scene 4. The ROI presentation. The same team from Scene 1 are gathered around the meeting table. The project technology manager and the construction manager jointly present the tagging proposal and return on investment calculation. Their tagging strategy focuses on pipe, steel, valves, and instruments. A significant double-digit return on investment is presented. The construction manager claims that
reasonable assumptions were built into the calculations, with primary benefits coming from better material control of high-cost valves and instrumentation, improved field labor productivity by the use of a central database that was broadly accessible by the field teams, and digital population of the PO data for the field receivers, and field labor productivity improved with smaller crews, such as less time required for receiving structural steel.
The project manager likes the presentation, but he states a condition of his approval.
I like the presentation. I would like to see where you will put milestones in the schedule for training, data mapping, and I would like to meet your site receivers who would use this technology. I believe in the return on investment you presented, but I need to be sure that your personnel will really embrace the technology as a tool that will help them.
The end.
Go back to the slides. So we have one more slide. Yeah, thank you. So as we hopefully the animation jogged some questions, and when we go to the Q&A, we'll be happy to answer any questions. There were some hidden Easter eggs in there, maybe that maybe it would jog some thoughts that you have. But as we close this presentation, we're reminded of the challenge, right? We have a very complex supply chain. We have materials coming from all over. We are trying to deliver those materials to our construction management teams at the right time, in the right place, right sequence, right quantities. And a digital materials tracking and tracing program will enable that. And we've talked about RT 384 having, it'll be a practical guideline. We don't believe that one exists prior to this. So we think this is a rather innovative thing that we've done here. We talked about the potential impact to materials, with 40 to 50% of the total installed cost being related to materials, possibly, the hundreds of suppliers, the potential to improve productivity by 6%, and being able to impact a schedule reduction. And we all know how challenging that is, right? We know with the supply chain challenges that we have today that it's going to become more and more of an important item. RT 384, it includes evaluating institutional maturity. You heard about that we have a tool for doing that. How to integrate your information. We have some very practical guidelines for that. When you've got an SAP or an Oracle system, and you maybe have some other system that you're using for your materials tagging and tracking. How to integrate with a project schedule. We really didn't talk about that, but the actual paper has a recommended schedule of when you would implement into the project schedule. Which materials to track. You saw a glimpse of that in what Steve presented. Tracking and tracing technologies. We do talk about the different technologies that are available. Communications with suppliers. You saw evidence of that. You saw the commercial terms, but we go actually deeper than that in the paper. Supplier training. Supplier training and training of your own people is a huge point, and we talk about that, and how to trace materials information. So these are all in RT 384. This is available on the knowledge base. So any construction team that plans to implement materials tracking and information tracing technologies should download final report RT 384, and we will have some webinars. So we would be very much looking forward to seeing you all participate in the webinars. So at this point, we thank you very much, and we are happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Great job, guys. A lot of questions for you today. The first one, Steve, I think you talked about this a little bit, but it's how do we get our vendors and suppliers to start tracking the components that they send us? Do we have to integrate with, do we have to ask them to integrate with our systems and methods?
Yeah, a couple of pieces on that one. First, as I said on the one, unless it's in the PO, it's an ad, and that becomes a challenge right away. So if your earlier strategies are, you don't want to do it with all suppliers, which ones have the value of it, and part of that value proposition with them is engaging them early and then talk about the onboarding process and the reporting processes. Try to bring them on early. And to be frank, if you're bidding, that's a challenge because you may have 3 or 4. So there's some strategies you've got to think about. What do I want to look at and work on that one? Our hope is as the industry matures, the bigger players or the big package equipment, as they see the value of this, they start bringing this on board over there. But it's outside of maybe steel suppliers and spool suppliers, it's fairly new in the industry.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to add to that if I could.
Sure.
So there's all different types of suppliers, right? You have some suppliers that are providing very complex packages to us. And those suppliers, it's not just the materials, but it's also the field service that they provide. And so one of the advantages of digital materials tracking and tracing program is that you can be more efficient in the field in constructing, installing, and commissioning. And so I think you all know that you take a GE or a Siemens or any manufacturer that has a complex package, and their field service personnel are a valuable commodity and very difficult to resource, right? So if we can work with these suppliers and convince them that this is going to be better for the install, we can be more efficient with your field service personnel, I think that's to their benefit as well.
Okay.
And I actually might add on a little bit, because some of the barriers you'll get with suppliers will be cost is obviously the big one. So it's early discussions about like who's going to supply the tagging, if you're going to do barcoding, who's going to supply the printers and do it over there. So if you get alignment early on that one, you have it. And, if it's a whole lot of active, passive, or active tags, it probably makes sense as either EPC or owner to supply it versus burden it on the supplier and have them just pass the cost back on to you. But there's other ones that barcode reading we've been doing for years in the industry. There's nothing new on that one. It's just more of getting the information technology aligned with that barcode so we have value to it.
Yeah. All right, great, thank you. Okay, this next one is about the parent-child relationship that you guys talked about. The question is, does that refer to bulks of material? I think it's bulks.
Bulks, I think.
Yeah.
I'm trying to answer this the right way.
Yeah.
Bulks usually come in a box, and the tag will just be box of 50, and then you draw it over there. So the parent-child's normally when you've got a major subcomponent. So I've got the compressor, and then I've got either the spare parts or I've got the erection pieces. Or on structural steel, I might have the embeds might be a separate one that would come in and do it. So it's on that one. It's usually not applied to bulks, like I say. My general experience is that you're not going to label each one. If you have a good inventory management system, when they pull the bolts out, they enter in, I took 4 out of it. Your inventory system just say my 50 is now reduced by 4. So you handle that by that.
Okay. All right, the next one is around the vendor landscape. So how many companies are out there that have shovel-ready tools and services for capital projects? What's your sense on that?
Okay, I guess I think the question is referring to the technology vendors for the tagging and tracking.
Seems like it.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is my opinion. My opinion is not enough. We need more. And in fact, if you were to, probably stack up all the capital projects that would like to use the technology, personally, I don't think we have enough resource. We have enough supply. I think we're supply constrained on the technology. So that's my opinion. I don't know if y'all.
Yeah, I would add to that one of the key components that we saw in the information tracing doesn't really require tagging. So one of the contractual components from owners and contractors to the suppliers and vendors is a recurrent information on delivery dates, on fabrication status, on fabrication issues, prospective issues that could impact the schedule. And that typically is submitted through common format like an Excel spreadsheet on a daily basis or every other day. And that doesn't really require tracking of the components, but it provides great benefit because it provides visibility into what's going on at the vendor or supplier.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next one is about your thoughts on connecting engineering tags with material and equipment.
I'd like to take that one.
That's a good one.
Yeah, so that's the right way to do it, actually. To start way up front with engineering, getting your bills of material coded properly. It's very challenging if you don't do that, and you're trying to apply a tagging program much further downstream. So I think that the right way is if you can have a work process where you've got coding that you're applying for your purchase requisitions, and you're able to use that same coding for your material tagging and tracking.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next one, did the research team consider how to leverage bring your own device strategy with this effort to reduce the equipment cost for tracking?
Yeah, actually the technology has matured even in the last 5 years. So if you're used to it was a proprietary iPad or a pad of some sort, doing over that one, I would say most of all the vendors have gone to either an Android or an iOS system that's on the pad. So we're there today on that one. It's over that one. Now you still got IT infrastructure with gate readers and some other things that you need to look at over there, but just the actual scanning of it over there, I think we've broken that barrier.
Can you repeat the question? I think
the question was, has the team considered how to leverage bring your own device?
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
We actually have in the deliverable, in the RT 384 document, we have a section on that. As Steve said, the commercially, or the technology that's available to everyone off of the App Store, you actually can have a very low-cost material tracking program yourself. There are a number. We document one of these free programs, and you can actually pay a couple dollars and increase the functionality of it. You can annotate. You can take pictures. There's a GPS camera. You can take a picture of your material. It'll capture your GPS coordinates. You can annotate it. You can annotate the picture. You can press send. You can send a spreadsheet with those GPS coordinates to your desktop, and then you can use any number of other programs to pinpoint the location of that. So there are these available. Of course, you have to decide whether the accuracy of that is going to be suitable, and if you have a large number of materials you're tracking, it may not be suitable. In most cases, it's not for a large project. But if you have a small project, there are some of those available.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. Did the team look at container packing and across-country or overseas tracking of equipment?
We do recognize that there are some very sensitive materials where you can put RFID tagging in the containers, but we didn't really go into a lot of detail with that.
We didn't set it on that one, but we do it over there with that one. It's no different than the boxes you saw over there. Now you just have a container, so you need to figure out, well, what am I going to do with the littler boxes and everything over there? So it's just at a larger scale. And then that's where you may go, if that container is valuable enough, do I put a GPS one on top of this thing so I can trace this thing as it goes around the globe?
Okay, thank you. Next one, what is the better approach to implement tracking and tracing, and who will be responsible? The owner, developers, contractors, designers, or others? This is 3 questions in one. What's the cost impact to the project, and does that cost include labor and application devices? That's a heavy one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can all have an opinion on that one. I'll say, who's handling the material in the field, and who's doing the construction work. And so, I think having the people doing the receiving and marshaling the materials for the construction, need to be the ones that are using the technology. Applying the tags, there's a concept called upstream tagging, and so having those tags applied at the manufacturer is a preferred approach. I think that addresses some of the question. I don't know if
I guess the other one would be, part of it is if your contractor is already using a system, that's probably where you want to look first before you impose a different system that's on there. So understanding who's there. But we've struggled, just as an industry whole, we've actually struggled with that, is how do you mandate it? And where do you put it over there? But our hope is the industry as a whole migrates to this where it becomes a norm in execution.
Yeah, with that in terms of cost, we found, as we presented, anecdotal evidence on multiple projects on the positive impact of upstream tracking and tracing, not only on resulting in on a positive ROI, but on a positive impact on the performance of a project. However, some of the research recommendations were for CII was in the future to actually analyze and come to an average of what is the return on investment or what is the return on, or the impact on a project, because that changes a lot from project to project. So with the few projects that we found evidence, we couldn't come to a conclusion.
And it's going to depend on your scope. Like I said, if you stay small over there, plus these systems are much more than tracking and tracking. It goes back, do you want to go all the way back to engineering?
Yeah.
Do you want to integrate quality and NCR data? No, that one. So part of that decision is how robust you're going to make it and take on. If you just want to simply tack and track, you say there are low-cost solutions that do better, that get you out of that paper Excel worksheet and gets this information in the digital realm.
And on the cost point, you might start thinking about, okay, what does this do to your supplier? Are they going, are they going to increase the cost of the materials? And that is something I think we should do some more work on as CII. In fact, I would suggest that it falls in the area of the supply chain CBA. We all know how important AWP is, and I say material tagging and tracking is also important. But getting the suppliers on board with it. Some suppliers, complex packages, they're already on board with it. Bulk materials, some of them already have barcoding. So there's a way to implement what suppliers already have, bring them into the tent. And I would say a CII project could be developing a program for the suppliers to participate in this tagging without increasing the cost. Understanding the value and trying to deliver that value for both the supplier and the owner operator.
Okay. All right, just a few more. How did the proposed savings, the ROI that you talked about, get calculated, especially the field productivity component? Is this not already covered by the AWP process benefits?
No, this, I would respond to that. That's captured by research before actually AWP. And there are several publications that explain that the impact on productivity and craft level productivity is between 4 and 6%. There's some other research that points out to savings in the construction schedule from an effective materials management, a function above 15, I think it was 16%. So that was captured, that was produced research through CII and non-CII research ahead of the AWP, actually.
We also have documented in the RT 384 paper an example of an EPC that did a study of offloading steel and how many people, how much time it took to offload the steel without having the tagging versus with the tagging. So that's an example of just receiving.
Okay, all right, thank you. Next one made me chuckle. Do you see challenges in connecting the tracking solutions to existing company technologies like IT security blocks or the time to implement?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
we see the challenges there. Yeah. And so we work with our IT department to try to work around that. But it is for sure. It's challenging.
There's an IT component to this that you do need to get around, so you need IT support as you roll this out. Yeah. And to go back to the what things were 3 or 4 years ago, these products change rapidly to do it, so you just need to keep current of where they're at, and you've got to consider the security concerns and everything when you look at these systems.
I mean, and if you don't have the seamless flow from system to system, it can create a lot of extra work. There's people working behind the scenes, plugging data into the database that the tracing system can recognize. And so that is very important to integrate your data systems if you're going to apply it in a consistent, large-scale approach.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I know I'm not on the panel, but I'm in IT. It is very hard to capture and keep location data, especially when it's coming from different types of devices. So I definitely echo what they said about engaging your IT to help you with that. Okay, last question, unless there's some more that come up. Can you speak, more got added. Can you speak to the differences in implementation of the program if you're an owner versus whether you're a contractor or project-based venture?
I think from an owner's perspective over there, we work through our EPCs. So we acknowledge that it's over there. And our general view, as I said, as a project manager, is I'm more interested in the visibility of the data to have assurances that the systems are running fine and doing it, and having the live data versus the 1 week report that's 1 week old after I already get it, to highlight it's over there. So from an owner, I generally would view as I just want to make sure you have a good system that's giving me that reporting. And I also am concerned that we don't have schedule delays because we're not finding materials and do that one. So the productivity aspect of this is, are we being the most efficient? So that's kind of my view.
I would comment that the work process is as important as the technology. And if you have too many different work processes, it makes it difficult to implement it broadly. So I think an owner is in a position to standardize Whereas you put it in the hands of a contractor, you end up with multiple options, and you have to train all of your people that are going to interface with it. So maybe I'm biased, but I think owners are in a good position to standardize more than a contractor.
But I wouldn't want to change an EPC system necessarily. That's how he's doing it and over there. So part of it's trying to understand what they're doing and
Yeah, if you have if you have a large project and hey, EPC, go, you do it all. If it's turnkey, it's their.
But if you're on a smaller I agree with you at plant level.
Yeah.
Looks like we're about it.
Okay, a lot of great questions, guys. Is this only an assessment that you've produced, or is there a tool from CII that can be implemented on projects?
It's a guide. So we produce a guideline for upstream tracking and tracing, complemented with on-site tracking and tracing, but there's also a tool. So there are a series of step-by-step in the 4 categories or stages that Steve has explained. And in addition to that, there's a tool that helps project teams or project managers to assess what is the goodness or the maturity in their tracking and tracing function, or can be used by owners, obviously, as well.
Yeah, but it's not it does have how-to in it. When you dive down there, it does how-to into it when you look at the guide.
I'd say it's tool agnostic, right? You can apply this whether you're using a tool that is provided by a technology supplier, or if you are developing your own in-house solution. The guidelines that are in there represent, combined experiences from this team, and it is tool agnostic.
Okay. All right, well, that is all the time we have for questions. There were a few questions that we didn't get to, so I encourage those of you who posted questions and didn't hear the answers to find one of these gentlemen at the next break and get your answer. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and appreciate the research you did and the report out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.